In Part 1, we explored the upcoming U.S. presidential election through the lens of astrology and examined how the planetary alignments on Election Day, November 5th, might help or hinder Donald Trump and Kamala Harris based on their natal horoscopes. The results were eye-opening. Here in Part 2, we'll use another tool, that of human design, to see if its system of keynoting can offer us any deeper clues that might shed some light on the planetary activations and archetypal energies of this critical time in the history of U.S. politics and world affairs. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of this special Election 2024 edition of the Lab. Happy to be bringing this content to you. Really fascinating. I was really actually surprised myself in some ways by what came out of the first part, part 1, when we looked at the astrology of Election Day and how it was impacting these two candidates, Trump and Harris. And yeah, I think it's a really useful lens to put on these times so that we can kind of step back and see what's really happening here at a collective level, at an archetypal level, at a symbolic level that really can inform how we navigate these somewhat challenging times. So yeah, it was interesting to me to use not only astrology, but to get into the Sabian symbols in that first video, which is something I don't use on a regular basis, and as part of my practice I will often refer to them if I have a deep question, but something just intuitively in me reached for an interpretation, particularly about that, Tuesday, that certain degree in Scorpio and that repeating pattern of our election cycle. And boy, was that eye-opening. I think that added a layer and a dimension that was quite fascinating. So I'm excited to bring you this second part where we're going to use yet another system, human design, and another tool, another lens, another perspective on this election. And as I was working this morning and looking at the charts and preparing for this video, I thought of the metaphor or an analogy that makes sense in how I would explain astrology and human design and integrating the two, right? I thought of remember those microscopes we had in high school biology class, and they had the 3 different lenses on kind of a turret, and you would different degrees of magnification. So you would start with that first level and you'd see the whole petri dish, right? And then you rotate that around, and all of a sudden you've got like a 10x or 100x, and all of a sudden, oh, there's a lot more going on underneath the hood at the molecular level or the cellular level, and then rotate it again and you get a 100 or a 500 or 1,000x magnification, and you're like, wow, like there's actually life in there. Things are moving, everything's alive, right? And so in many ways, that's how I see astrology and human design. Astrology gives us the map or the bigger picture. It shows us the whole sort of scene, and then human design says, wait a minute, look closer, right? It's not just these 12 zodiac signs. There's 64 gates inside of that wheel. Right? And then, another layer down is and there's 6 lines inside of each of those 64 gates. There's these 384 sort of qualities going on. And then you even get the super electron microscope, right? Right. And then you get down to the cellular level, and you see this thing called the body graph, and that there's actually an energy map inside of there, and everything is moving, everything is alive, right? It's almost like our modern physics getting down to the quantum level, right? And in a lot of ways, that's what human design purports. It says it's showing us the mechanics of the Maya in this quantum reality that we live in. So interesting to use that. So we're going to jump in and look at these charts and see if we can discern or find some more insights into some of these positions, right? What we saw in the astrology and that grand trine with Mars and the North Node and Mercury. We saw Jupiter in Gemini. Let's see if we can get more information and more distinctions from looking at the keynoting process. This is what human design is really good at. It has these keynotes that we can string together to find the deeper meaning. So without further ado, let's do it. Trump versus Harris Part 2, Who Will Win? Human Design Edition. So I want to start with the transit chart, as usual. And this is essentially taking what we did in the astrology video, right? Here is the chart for November 5th, and just showing here 0 degrees Aries. And so we've got, Saturn and Neptune and the North Node here, Uranus and Jupiter. And we look over here, same thing, right? Here's all the planets in all the signs, yet they're mapped not just to, so Jupiter's not just in Gemini, Jupiter is also in gate 45, right? Mars is not just in that first degree of Leo, it's activating gate 56. The Sun is not just in 13 degrees Scorpio, it's activating gate 1. And this is where it starts to get interesting. Each of these gates has a meaning and a keynote. Inside there are 6 lines to each of these gates that has a meaning and a keynote. And each of those activates a part of this body graph, right? This is the electron microscope at its most magnified. We can see that they actually activate a life pattern, a flow of energy that shows us, really, you could say this is a circuit map to the energy and quality of the time. So here we are, looking at 7 a.m. on November 5th. I'm using this software called Neutrino Platform. Shout out to Alex and his team. This is in beta right now that I'm testing, and it's a brilliant piece of software. And so I'm grateful to have the ability to use this and share this with you. Just a shout out, I don't get any compensation from them. I just like to support good people doing good things. So anyway, so let's dive in and let's really see what's going on here at the human design level, right? And so sort of as a recap, what we really discovered when we looked at the astrology and we looked at the transits and we looked at Mars and we saw that it was in this, grand fire trine involving the North Node in Aries and Mercury here in Sagittarius, right? This was sort of a very powerful configuration that's active on that day. But then we noticed also this Mars is involved in a very close, tight opposition with Pluto over here in the 29th degree of Capricorn, right? And of course, we also have the Sun, which is in that 13 degrees of Scorpio here. And those were sort of the big pictures. Oh, we also looked at Jupiter being in Gemini and having an impact on both of Trump and Harris's chart in a big way, right? So now human design really doesn't take into consideration aspects, but what it does is now it says, okay, let's take a deeper look, because now we have gate activations for all these planetary positions. So we can look at, for instance, what's going on with the Sun in the first gate, what's going on with Mars in the 56th gate, each of these activating a different part of the body graph here. And it was very interesting to me to note that the Sun is in the first gate when we're at this degree of Scorpio. It's essentially from about 13 to 17 degrees of Scorpio is gate 1. And when I looked historically at when election day falls, and this would be interesting to do, but I think you could go back at least 20 years and election day will always fall in gate 1 in the human design system, the first gate, right? And you couldn't, predict that in any way. The gate of self-expression, a very powerful position. So it's no surprise that, intuitively or by coincidence, synchronistically, however you want to look at it, that we are using the Sun in gate 1 as our day to choose the next president. I find that fascinating. The other thing that's immediately apparent that you wouldn't see in the astrology is that when we look at the body graph here, the first gate is part of a channel with the 8th gate, which creates this channel of inspiration, the design of a creative role model, right? So pretty interesting right away that you get this very powerful activation with the Sun in the first gate, and then looking at the activation in this 8th gate is coming from Uranus. So this is a really cool way of starting to look a little deeper, right? We're getting a degree of magnification. So the first thing we would consider is, okay, what line of that first gate is being active? So it's not just self-expression, but it's in the first line of that gate. And that line has this keynote called creation is independent of will. And we'll see that it's in detriment here, right? Why is the sun in detriment? Because the detriment is indicated by Uranus, with which it is making this electromagnetic connection, this harmonic connection across the channel. Because that 8 is Uranus, it is influencing this sun in the first gate to behave more like Uranus would behave. And Uranus in this gate, in this line, gate 1, line 1, is instability leads to distortion. Here, patience is a virtue and revolution is a vice. Creative instability unless there is patience. Now this is really interesting to me, and one of the things when I use human design coming from astrology as I do, I'm also really interested in the planetary activations. And having looked at Trump's chart in depth as I have and we have in these videos, you know, he's a very Uranian individual, right? He's got Uranus conjunct his Sun and North Node in Gemini. This guy channels the Uranian energy. He is radical. He is unpredictable. He is wild. He is rebellious. He's iconoclastic. Say what you will about him, but he has this sort of wild Uranian unpredictability to him. So whenever we see Uranian activations in the human design chart, I really think those are good indications of how those influences will affect Trump as a person, as a personality. So instability leads to distortion here, right? Patience is a virtue, revolution is a vice. That revolutionary instinct of Uranus is really not helpful here. So we could read this on some level as if Trump is too impatient, and if Trump's supporters don't have the patience, right? Patience is a virtue. And I think we all know this is probably going to be a very close race, and we probably are going to have to be incredibly patient until we get the results of this election. A lot of these will be too close to call. A lot of the swing states will have to have days to count all the votes. There will be likely recounts. There will be challenges. It could get into the court system. We're all kind of bracing for that. But here's an example where patience is a virtue, revolution is a vice. So a little bit of a keynote of caution here and a little sort of prescience, if you will, in terms of what could come from this activation on election day. People getting impatient for the results, right? On the other side, we would look at what's the Uranus activation in that 8th gate. This is the gate of contribution. This is a voice that says, I want to contribute my piece, my voice, my perspective. And if we look at it, it's actually in line 2 of that gate. And this is all about service, right? Sun exalted here, right? Because it's part of this connection to the sun. Now this becomes very important in this chart because these planets, by virtue of creating a channel, create activation and definition. That means that the G center of direction has activation and the throat is active. It means that all the voices, the expression is here, contributing to what will be said and expressed on that day. So let's also look at the other planets that we looked at, particularly what was going on in that fire trine with, first of all, let's look at this Mercury in Sag, which is activating gate 34 in the sacral center and also creating definition by its connection to the 10th gate in the G center, which is the moon, right? This is a very fast-moving transit. The moon over the course of election day will move all the way through the 10th gate and into the 58th gate by the end of November 5th. So very interesting. It's activating what we call the behavior of the self gate. And it's going to go through all the behaviors of the roles that we all play. Yet Mercury here is activating gate 34. This is the gate of power. right? Very interesting to think about Mercury now activating this power gate, and we get this keynote of triumph as it is in the 34-4, right? The freedom and absolute victory to unlimited use of power. And again, I said earlier, I think Trump's a very Uranian character. He's also a very Plutonian character. Remember, he has Pluto in Leo, the sign of his ascendant. We put it in his first house, along with that Mars. Pluto, Mars, ascendant Leo. That personality, his persona, very Plutonian. He's kind of a, let's blow it all up, let's drain the swamp, let's transform this whole political system. I am that, dictatorial leader. I am Plutonic in many ways. So again, when we see Pluto keynotes and activations in these lines, whether exalted or detriment, it's an indicator of how this energy is going to affect this character, right? This major character in this play, if you will, of this election. So this is a little foreboding, really, to me, like the freedom and absolute victory to unlimited use of power. And this is something that he has said, right? Trump has articulated, if I'm elected president on day one, I will act like a dictator and I will completely unleash my will, my political will. Triumph, right? So whose message gets to triumph? Who gets the power to express that? And this is also the triumph of the will of the people, right? In many respects. We are exercising our right to express ourselves through our vote, expression, Mercury, right? That power to be who we are, behave as ourselves in any way we see fit, right? So there's a lot of layers that we can analyze this at. So we could look at it at the level of how is this affecting the candidates? And we'll look deeper at that when we pull up their natal body graphs. And, what is just the overall energy here, which is what we're looking at on that day. It's empowered. There's a sacral energy. Now, this is going to change because the moon will move out of the 10th gate and we'll lose this activation. But early on in the day, there is a sacral power. People will be motivated to get out and express themselves, to use their political voice, to use their political power to get out and vote. So my guess is that there may be a lot of activity early on in the day when the polls open on the East Coast. We may see a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people lining up at polling places before they even open, perhaps. Could be an indicator of this energy and power of the desire to express ourselves as a collective, but as individuals in a collective. This is a very individual channel. Very interesting, right? And I wouldn't have associated this Mercury in Sag with this power that it has. So this is a nice, again, another subtle layer that we get by looking at human design integrated into our astrological lens. The other one I think that's really important that we talked about a lot in the other video, what's going on with this Mars in Leo at the very early degrees of Leo, activates gate 56, which is another throat gate. This is the throat gate, the voice that says, I believe, right? This is all about the human experiential way in many ways. This is the gate of stimulation, right? So Mars is being very stimulating in this chart on this day. So we take a look at the keynote here, right, of stimulation, but we get this fifth line and we see Mars is actually in detriment here. And again, as we said, Mars in Leo, Trump with that Mars conjunction his ascendant is a very Martian character. So again, all of these keynotes seem to point me towards some of the potential influences of this energy on Trump as an individual. How is this energy going to affect him? And what do we read here? Attracting attention. All too often, the tendency to attract attention that is self-defeating in its effects. The power of stimulation to provoke and to disturb. And as I read this, and as I was looking at this and preparing, I was like, boy, does that sound like something Trump could do, right? He could actually try to attract attention and just say the wrong thing at the wrong time leading up to election day, right? Here's a guy who famously will sort of just blurt stuff out. I'm sure he must drive his team crazy, right? Trying to keep him on message. Or I don't really think they do anymore. I think he has surrounded himself with yes men and yes women who will not, just let Trump be Trump, right? Let the chips fall where they may. And I think a lot of people appreciate that about Trump. But here's another, like, these keywords were very interesting to me and revealing, like I said, a layer I probably wouldn't have appreciated about this Mars placement in Leo if I hadn't gone under the line level and gotten some of these deep keynotes. So we're starting to string those together and see different influences that could play out on election day. So are you attracting the wrong kind of attention? Now, this also applies to Kamala Harris. She's also has that Mars in Leo in her natal chart, so that would be detrimental as well. But this comes into her third house. Interesting to see this symbol play out. Now, the other piece that we should look at if we're going to complete this fire trine is this activation of the North Node over here in Aries. And we see it's lighting up the 17th gate. This is a gate in the Ajna Center. This is known as the Gate of Opinions. Now, not as impactful because right away we see it's in an open center. It's not being activated by the detail of gate 62 on the other end of the channel here. So this is what we would call a hanging gate. So these opinions won't be as impactful as the creativity of the self would be with that sun activation, or as the 56 would be in this active throat gate with Mars. But nonetheless, worth looking at. What is this North Node pointing us to? What are the opinions, right? Understanding in this third line. And again, we get a Plutonian exaltation. So here again, clues to how it may impact Trump. In order to have an understanding, these opinions have to be grounded in the details. Third line, right? This gate overall is the ancient law that those who wish to rule must know how to serve. It's just a good piece of advice to any political aspirant, right? If you want to learn to rule, you must learn to serve. Who is of greater service? Who understands the needs of the future and the direction of the country? North Node. Where are we going? What is the environmental perspective, direction, focus of the country moving forward? Whoever I think can articulate, captivate that sense of the understanding and having the opinion that is grounded in facts and details may have the advantage, right? So here we might say, oh, that does sound a little more like Harris than Trump, right? He's not really about details or facts, really. He's really more about his narrative. Truth just gets in the way of his message, as he's proven time and time again for the last 8 years as he's been on the public scene here. So you might say, oh, this may support Harris's position a little bit more strongly than it would Trump's, because she has the ability to leverage that logic. So those are the three trines in these fire trines. The other one, of course, that we talked a lot about in the astrology video, will be interesting to get an under the hood look at, is this Pluto in this last degree of Capricorn. And it's been in this 60th gate going back and forth for the last couple years. But if we look what's going on under the hood here, we see that on election day it's in the fourth line, and it's the gate of acceptance, accepting limitation. And here it's a call for resourcefulness, the reasoned and intelligent maximization of potential within limitations. There is a need to be resourceful with limitations. This could be interesting, coming down to a few 100,000 votes perhaps in this election for the Electoral College, perhaps, right? And I think this is the deeper symbol. Like we talked about this being the last degree of Capricorn, the 29th degree, the anaretic degree. It's in the bounds of Mars. It's a very difficult position. The last gasp of the Pluto and Capricorn era, right? Within the next month, we're done with Capricorn. We're moving into Aquarius, but it's really fascinating to me that this election takes place under that influence, the last potential to go back, right? Capricorn, make America great again, versus forward, Aquarius, right? So here we're getting another deeper insight into what's going on with this very particular degree of Capricorn. And it's about limitation. It's about acceptance, and it's about being resourceful. So which candidate can be more resourceful in this situation? Well, that remains to be seen, but this will give us something to contemplate here. Now, the other one, the last one we want to look at that we talked about quite a bit in the astrology video, was this Jupiter in Gemini. And here we see it's in the 45th gate. This is another throat gate. This is the only voice of the tribe. And this is a really important voice, ladies and gentlemen. I will say this. Jupiter in the 45th, line 4, right? This is the gate of the gatherer, right? I would say this is the gate of the king, the gate of the queen. This is the top of the tribal hierarchy, a very political gate in many ways. Jupiter is exalted in this gate. The ability to focus the opportunity of gathering together for the service of higher principles. This Jupiter wants to expand. It wants to give us direction for the tribe, direction for the country, right? America is really just a tribe of, 330 million people in many ways. So this Jupiter in the 45th gate feels like, of all of the symbols we've looked at so far, feels the most potent and active and politically charged, right? It's the voice of the tribe, the 45th voice that says, I possess the power to affect change. And I hear it saying, I can give the direction, right? So where this will activate the charts of each of the candidates is really going to be interesting. So here we're going to show sort of the magic now. This is the transits only. So if I now go back and turn on Trump's natal activations, now we're going to see how is this affecting him personally. And one of the things that becomes quite obvious if you look at Trump's chart is he has the 45 natally as his activation. This is that Gemini, North Node, and Uranus. This is where that Jupiter conjunct his natal North Node and Uranus in Gemini in the 11th house. And we saw in the astrology how impactful I felt like that was one of the most potent symbols. It also bears out here in the human design analysis as well, because he also has the 21st gate. The hunter meets the gatherer. This is the channel of the money line, which shouldn't be of any surprise to anyone. I mean, that Trump has the money channel. Here's a guy who was born into wealth and has always been surrounded by wealth and luxury, right? This is a man who is driven. He has an ego. It's the gate of the egoist. 26, 21, 45. This is so endemic of his character. He is a emotional ego manifesting generator, right? This guy is emotional and he is egocentric. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but here is his human design pointing it out. And we can see that he's going to get multiple activations of this gate 45. So it's not just that Jupiter coming through there. His North Node activates that. Leadership, you know. This is the part of him who thinks he is a leader by design. And quite honestly, he is. You don't get to that level. You don't get to play this game at the highest level without having some chutzpah. And this guy's got it in spades. And, you know, the fifth line is the leadership line. This is the general of the tribe, right? Intuitive intellect and gift for innovation that enhances the group effort and ensures continuity through respect of the center. Again, Uranus in a position of exaltation, right? Jupiter's in detriment here, a sense of right action that assumes a respect that may not as yet be earned. The drive for leadership that may not yet earn the right. Does he have the right to be the leader? He has the desire, he has the will, he has the ego drive, but is he the right leader for the time? That's the question. I mean, that's one of the questions we're going to the polls to decide. So it's very telling that he has this keynote. Again, you can't write this stuff, right? This is, to me, it's just, it's awe-inspiring to see how these things work, right? This isn't created for Trump or for this chart or for this election. It just is. This is the activation of the frequencies that this human being was born with and that is being enhanced at this critical time, right? By the quality of the time that we're moving through. So interesting to note. The other activation he has there is Uranus itself, which is in the first line. So a slightly different activation of that gathering. And here the keynote is canvassing. And again, this is actually a political term, right? You can't write this stuff. This is a guy who's literally canvassing for votes across the country for the last 2 years and doing it in a Uranian way, unconventional, nonconformist, rebellious, revolutionary, reforming, iconoclastic, erratic, unexpected. Does that not describe Trump to a T? And Jupiter is exalted in this position. The ability to promote and develop gathering together through the education of the uncommitted. And again, this one just, I was just like in awe of that, because it's exactly what the Republicans, the Trump Republican, the new Trump Republican Party has done. It has gone after what we call the disenfranchised voter. People who feel like they've been left behind by the 21st century and the global world financial system and the move of technology, the Rust Belt, the South, the Midwest, people who feel like they aren't heard, and he's giving them a voice. Reread this keynote, right? Education of the uncommitted. The uncommitted, right? The undecided voter. It's pretty fascinating to see this. And so it's not surprising to me, because this often happens when I do these analyses, right? What shows up in the astrology is reinforced in the human design, but just gives us a different lens. This is a different layer of magnification, to go back to our microscope analogy. So we're just sort of drilling down into what's present in this 45th gate. This is a powerful voice and a leadership voice. He also has the 35th gate, which is his emotional voice, which he really can speak with feeling. He's a very emotional person. He's got the 12th voice, which is also emotional and individual. The 56th. Now here we again. Well, let's look at this. That activation of Mars in his chart is lighting up his 11th gate of ideas. And where does that come from? Here's his personality Earth. Attunement. Are his ideas attuned to the needs of the collective? Here, no. Mars is in detriment here. Because of that Mars connection being activated by the transit, we get sort of the detriment of this attunement, the fear of anonymity, the sense that no one will value their ideas. This is a very, very, I think, intellectually insecure human being. And he does fear being anonymous, being forgotten. That was the worst thing that could have happened to him when he got kicked off of Twitter, for instance. That fear, I won't be important, I won't be able to share my ideas with my millions of followers. The fear of anonymity. Very interesting how this plays out. And now we say, well, does that Mars activation help him or hurt him here? I guess it depends on whether his ideas are well attuned to the voting populace or not. Does he have the right attunement to what the message should be, to what the proper use of power should be? Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So we look at Mars, we've looked at Jupiter. This activation of Mercury and the moon does light up his 57th gate of intuition. His natal Jupiter gets a little boost here, right? Acuteness, the perfected intelligence, where clarity eliminates doubt and ensures manifestation. the possibility of perfected intuition. Is Trump's intuition correct? Right? He intuits that he can really get into the collective unconscious. He's tapping into the shadow of America. And he thinks that's where he can win. He thinks that's where he has the most traction. And he may be right? There is a lot of discontent. There's a lot of shadow in this country as we struggle with this identity crisis, right? We talked about Jupiter and Gemini being the perfect symbol for this sort of collective national schizophrenia and incredibly divided populace that we are living through. So very interesting to see this keynote. So for the sake of time, let's just move on and let's look at the transits as they show up in Kamala Harris's chart. And now we see something quite different, right? What stands out to me immediately is that in contrast to Trump, Harris is not an ego being and she's not an emotional being, right? She doesn't have that drive, that egocentric will. She doesn't have the emotional quality of her voice. This is a much more mentally focused being, right? She has way more activation in her head and ajna that gets to her throat. She is a generator. She's a classic generator. But it's really interesting to see, first of all, that Jupiter activation in Gemini. Because she doesn't have the 21, it just doesn't give her the same boost to her ego, her will, her drive, her ambition. But without that 21, the hunter doesn't get to the gatherer. The energy and aggressiveness doesn't get to be the king, the queen, the ruler. There's one thing that's different between that Jupiter activation. That 56 in Mars, though, does give her something strong because we see that sits exactly on her design sun. So she has an activation here where she can get an advantage. Expediency, the perfection of the superficial personality. And a lot of people would say that's a criticism of Kamala Harris, like she's a mask, she's a persona. There's a feeling that she's not really authentic. She's not warm, right? It's just she's playing the role and trying to be the character of the progressive leader and change agent where it doesn't feel authentic. She's gotten better, right? I think she's gotten more personal. And I think something, if I looked at her design as I have, and I was an advisor to her, I would have advised her to tell her story. Her personal story has a lot of character to it. It has gravitas. It lands. And I don't think she's leaned into her narrative of her personal story enough, right? You know, a black woman of mixed race, you know, that background, that story has impact. And I'm surprised they haven't used that as a greater resource in her campaign, but they didn't ask me, so. But this is an interesting keynote, the superficial personality. So maybe that's enough. Maybe people will resonate with that persona. They will be stimulated by her story, because that's what this is. This is the channel of the storyteller, right? And that means that her ideas, this activation that she has with her South Node, does get a little more gravitas. Can she be the realist? Can her ideas be real? But if I'm looking for a clue and a keynote here, she has very much been more of the realist candidate against what we could probably aptly describe as the surreal campaign of Donald Trump. Are her ideas sound? Are her stories good? Does she have the right narrative? This is the one area I feel this does give her some stimulation, a little bit of a boost, where that Mars energy could support and amplify her message and her position as being the realist, the adult in the room, the more fundamentally grounded leader that will navigate and move America in the right direction, even though it's her South Node, where she's coming from. Her past is a realist. I'm a prosecutor, I'm a lawyer, I'm level-headed, I can make sense of the world, and I can make more informed decisions that will be level-headed and not emotional and egocentric. I think it's an interesting thing if you look at the comparisons here. it's hard for me to deny that the transits of the day seem to support Trump's chart more powerfully from the perspective of astrology as well as human design. And so that's my assessment of the transits. I also want to just look at both of their charts side by side, because I think there's something to be said and to be seen when we look at here are just their natal charts. You can just see the different activations. You can see how they show up differently. And as I was pointing out, if you look at Trump, he's emotional, right? He's egocentric, and he's got a big mouth. He's got a lot of throat voices. He's got a lot to say. And he feels emboldened and empowered to express his emotions, to express that egocentric will. He's also this manifesting generator. So he has the sacral power. He's got that 59-6. He's got this potency. And he's got that 36-35, very emotional and very tribal. This is completely different when you look at Kamala Harris's chart. Yes, she's also a sacral being. She's a generator. She's got that 63, right? This is her probably most potent channel, the channel of mutation. Could she be this individual that really changes things? Could she be the first female president of the United States? If that's possible, that's where it comes through. So in a way, that is the Pluto in Capricorn in the 60th gate. So there is one way where is she structured enough to be able to provide the mutation necessary to bring us into the Aquarian era. The other thing about her is that her voice is mental. She's a mentally projected voices, right? She's got, as we said, this 1156, this is the storyteller. This is why I think she should be telling her story to the American people. She really has the abstract sensing storytelling circuit, right? She really can put the past in perspective. Her own past, her own narrative, where she's come from, where we're going. What's the story? If she can tell the story better than Trump can, just give you his bluster of his egocentric, narcissistic, sort of leadership quality. That's kind of the battle we're going between. Which of these two characters do we want to lead this country for the next 4 years? In many ways, Trump really does exemplify what we would call that dark triad of characteristics. He's narcissistic, he's Machiavellian, and he's psychopathic. Those are the three dark triads. And those are characteristics, that's not to be really super critical or even pejorative, those are the characteristics of every CEO that's super successful in the business world, in the tribal, cutthroat, game business world. The dark triad. He is the dark triad prince. He's the prince of the dark triad par excellence, right? He has all of those characteristics. Is that what we want for our leader? You choose. Or do we want this more mentally focused, someone who's going to use ideas more than opinions, right? Trump's got the opinions. He's got the gate of opinions here, and he's got a voice to express those opinions. She's about ideas. It's an interesting comparison, ideas versus opinions. So many ways we could go, and I could go hours into the details of these charts, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward and just look at a couple other things. We have what's called the profile in human design. So you got Harris, who's a 2-4, and that means she is a hermit opportunist, right? Versus Trump, who's what we call a 1-3, right? He's an investigator martyr. And I really feel like the unconscious activation here, the opportunist versus the martyr, just really seems to characterize at a very, very basic level. If I took one keynote from these two, Harris feels very much like the opportunist. She has made the most of her opportunities. Here's someone who didn't win a primary in 2020, and didn't have to go through a primary in 2024, now has the opportunity to be president. This is very much the hermit opportunist, waits for the right time to be called into service, and when she does, steps up and seizes the opportunity, right? Compare that to Trump. He's the classic martyr, right? Everyone's out to get him. He is the target of attacks. He has been the target of a massive conspiracy by the deep state. He won the election. He denies that he did. He's such a martyr. This is unconscious, right? This shows us their unconscious motivations in many ways. So the opportunist versus the martyr. If I'm scripting this as a movie or a play, these are the two characters that we are watching compete in many ways. But again, just looking at the sort of gestalt of it, they're both very powerful people, right? They have plenty to say. Each of them, she's got the 4 voices, he's got the 5. He's just plugged in more in terms of his expression and manifestation. And in the end, I really think this 45th gate with Jupiter there is really going to enhance his position. The only thing possible is that Americans choose the more grounded, rooted sensibility of Harris's ability to mutate through limitation. Let's not change the order. Let's not blow up the system. Let's not throw out what worked. Let's mutate through the limitation and the acceptance of the work that needs to be done. This, to me, in her chart is her most powerful activation vis-a-vis the transits on November 5th. Pluto in the 60 versus Trump getting that Jupiter expansion to his tribal leadership capacity. Are we going to follow the old tribal patterns? Or are we going to mutate and evolve? Are we going to accept a new direction that is more sensible and balanced in its mental approach, that is more about ideas than it is about opinions? In the end, that's kind of my analysis of the human design of the election. So, pretty fascinating. I don't know if you're as stimulated or turned on by that process as I am. I just find it fascinating to see these keynotes and to string them together and just see, like, when some of those words that come out, words like canvassing and attention seeking and the ego drive, that this Jupiter is really just blowing up the voice of the tribe. It wants the most boisterous, gregarious, loudest leader of the tribe. It's that message is getting amplified somehow, some way. So it was interesting for me to see how the Pluto in Capricorn, which really seems to lead astrologically towards the past and towards the old, towards the Make America Great Again, actually was the more powerful activation in Harris's chart, with her ability to connect to that acceptance of the limitation and have something more practical, and to be the mutating force that changes the direction of America. Like I said, the first female president of mixed race, of Indian and Black descent, that would be a monumental breakthrough. That would be quite a mutation of our old process, and to me would really quite nicely sort of symbolize the move of Pluto in Capricorn and initiate this Pluto in Aquarius era. Will that be the result on election day or in the days and weeks that follow? Stay tuned, right? But now at least we have some of a perspective on some of the symbols, some of the archetypes, some of the energy patterns that are weaving our way through this incredibly, what is that old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times? Some say it's a curse, right? We are living in interesting times indeed. But start looking for these, looking at these things in this way, looking with these lenses, whether it's a big, broad perspective or we're magnifying 1,000 times and getting at the quantum level. As above, so below. It's a fractal, right? It's all a holograph, if you will. The devil is always in the details, though. So, all right. Hope you enjoyed that. Until next time, Saturn.